The ancient oak stood like a fortress in the Vietnamese jungle, its massive trunk hollowed by centuries of storms and decay. Captain Sarah Chen pressed her bleeding back against the bark, listening for the enemy patrol that had been hunting her for 3 days. She was supposed to be dead, shot down over hostile territory, another casualty of a war that had already claimed too many. But Sarah wasn't just any pilot. She was a decorated Air Force intelligence officer with classified knowledge that could shift the balance of power. As footsteps faded into the distance, Sarah noticed something impossible beneath the tangled roots. Stone steps, carved with symbols that shouldn't exist. The staircase descended into darkness, leading to a vast underground chamber filled with technology that defied explanation. Glowing crystals pulsed with energy, ancient machines hummed with alien purpose, and in the center, a message written in perfect English: "We've been waiting for you, Sarah Chen." The war above suddenly seemed insignificant compared to what she'd stumbled into. Who built this place? And how did they know her name? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah's hand trembled as she reached toward the glowing message, suspended in midair like a hologram. The letters shimmered with an otherworldly luminescence that made her eyes water. Her fingers passed through the text, sending ripples of light cascading across the chamber walls. The space was impossibly vast, stretching beyond what the tree's circumference should have allowed. Crystalline formations jutted from walls that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. The air tasted of copper and ozone, electric with an energy that made her skin tingle. Whatever this place was, it operated on principles that challenged everything she knew about physics and engineering. A soft chime echoed through the chamber, and the message shifted. New words formed in the same perfect English. "Welcome, Captain Chen. Your arrival marks the beginning of the final phase." Sarah's military training kicked in despite her shock. She pressed herself against the nearest wall, scanning for exits and potential threats. The stone beneath her palm felt warm, almost alive. Through the translucent surface, she could see networks of light flowing like rivers of electricity, connecting the various crystalline nodes throughout the chamber. "Final phase of what?" she whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the space. The response came immediately, as if the chamber itself could hear her thoughts. "The convergence. Your species stands at a crossroads. The knowledge you carry from above makes you the perfect catalyst." Sarah's blood ran cold. The classified intelligence locked in her memory. Satellite reconnaissance of unusual geological formations across Southeast Asia, radiation signatures that didn't match any known technology, reports of entire military units discovering underground anomalies only to have their findings buried by higher command. She'd assumed it was all connected to some advanced enemy weapons program. She'd been catastrophically wrong. One of the larger crystalline formations began to glow brighter, and images materialized within its faceted surface. Sarah watched in fascination and growing horror as scenes played out like a movie. Ancient civilizations building massive underground networks. Beings that looked almost human but moved with impossible grace, their eyes reflecting the same otherworldly light that filled this chamber. Then came images she recognized: modern military installations, government facilities, world leaders in meetings she knew had never been reported to the public. The scope was staggering. This wasn't just about her discovery, it was about a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of global power. "You're monitoring everything," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. "You've been watching us." "We are not the Watchers," the message reformed. "We are the Guardians. Your world's true history was hidden for good reason, but time grows short, the barriers weaken." The chamber shuddered, and dust cascaded from above. Through the stone ceiling, Sarah could hear the distant sound of helicopter rotors. Her heart raced. Either rescue had arrived, or her pursuers had found her hiding spot. "I have to go," she said, backing toward the stone steps. "You cannot unsee what you have witnessed. You cannot unknow what you now know. When you are ready to learn the truth about your world's origins, return to any hollow tree. We are connected to them all." Sarah hesitated at the threshold. Every instinct told her to climb those stairs and never look back, to pretend this underground marvel was just a hallucination brought on by days of dehydration and stress. But the classified intelligence she carried suddenly made terrifying sense when viewed through the lens of this discovery. The helicopter sounds grew louder. Sarah took one last look at the impossible chamber, committing every detail to memory, then scrambled up the stone steps. As she emerged into the hollow oak's interior, the entrance sealed itself as if it had never existed. She pressed against the bark, peering through a gap in the trunk. American helicopters circled overhead. Her rescue had finally arrived. But as relief flooded through her, one question echoed in her mind. If they could monitor everything, did they already know she was being rescued? The gunfire had stopped 3 hours ago, but Sarah Chen remained motionless in the hollow of the ancient oak, her body pressed against the rough bark like a second skin. Blood from the shrapnel wound in her shoulder had dried into a sticky crust, and her left leg throbbed where the bullet had grazed her thigh during the escape. But she was alive, which was more than she could say for the other prisoners who'd attempted the breakout from the compound. Through the canopy above, fragments of grey sky filtered down like broken promises. The forest stretched endlessly in all directions, and somewhere out there, her captors were still hunting. She'd been their prize catch. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, intelligence officer, holder the rough bark pressed against Elena's spine as she shifted position for the 100th time, her military-issued boots finding purchase on the ancient oak's massive branches. 3 days had passed since she'd scrambled up this tree, driven by desperation and the sound of enemy vehicles closing in. Now, as dawn broke across the Romanian countryside, she realized the patrol sounds had ceased entirely. Below her, the forest floor revealed disturbing inconsistencies. The search teams had trampled through yesterday, their boots leaving deep impressions in the soft earth. But something was wrong with the patterns. Some of the tracks simply ended. Not at tree bases where soldiers might have taken cover, not at rocky outcroppings where traces would naturally disappear. They just stopped, as if the men had vanished mid-step. Elena's throat burned with thirst. Her water had run out yesterday, and the previous night's rain had provided only a few precious drops caught in her cupped palms. The protein bar in her pocket, her last, remained untouched. She'd learned in survival training to ration everything when rescue seemed unlikely. A metallic glint caught her eye. 30 yards northwest, partially concealed beneath a fallen branch, lay what appeared to be a radio unit. Standard issue, but not from her unit. Elena studied the area carefully, noting the unnatural way the undergrowth had been disturbed. The radio's antenna bent at an odd angle, as if dropped hastily. She made her decision. Staying in the tree meant slow death by dehydration. Moving meant risk, but also possibility. The descent required careful planning. Her left shoulder, injured during the initial ambush that had separated her from her squad, screamed in protest as she lowered herself branch by branch. The forest remained eerily quiet. No bird songs, no insect chatter. Even for late autumn, the silence felt oppressive. Her boots touched earth with barely a whisper. Years of training had taught her to move like smoke when necessary. She approached the radio in a crouch, weapon ready, eyes scanning for threats. The device was definitely military grade, but the markings were unfamiliar. Not Romanian, not from any NATO ally she recognized. The casing bore scratches that looked almost like claw marks, though that seemed impossible. More puzzling still, the radio appeared to be transmitting. A small red light pulsed steadily, and when Elena pressed her ear close, she detected a faint humming. Not static, but something more structured, almost like a heartbeat. She photographed the device with her phone, grateful the batteries still held a charge, then continued her search for water. The topographical map in her memory suggested a stream roughly 2 kilometers east, but Elena had learned not to trust maps completely in unfamiliar terrain. 20 minutes of careful navigation brought her to what should have been the stream bed. Instead, she found herself staring at an impossibility. The creek was there, exactly where indicated, but it flowed uphill for nearly 50 meters before disappearing entirely into what appeared to be solid granite. Elena knelt beside the water, testing it cautiously. Clear, cold, and apparently clean. She drank deeply, then filled her collapsible bottle. The water tasted faintly metallic, with an underlying mineral content unlike anything she'd encountered. While resting, she noticed the stones lining the streambed, too uniform, too precisely placed. What she'd initially taken for natural rock formation revealed itself under closer inspection to be carefully fitted stonework, ancient-looking but engineered with mathematical precision that spoke of advanced understanding. Her satellite phone showed no signal, hadn't shown signal since the ambush, but according to her compass, she was only 40 kilometers from the extraction point. A hard day's march through difficult terrain, manageable if she avoided enemy patrols. The sound reached her gradually, so subtle she almost dismissed it as wind through the trees. But the forest was still. No wind stirred the remaining leaves. The sound came from below, a rhythmic vibration that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. Elena pressed her palm flat against the ground, definitely artificial, mechanical, like distant machinery operating far beneath the surface. She followed the stream to where it vanished into the granite face. Up close, what had appeared to be solid rock revealed hairline seams, barely visible unless examined directly. The stone had been cut and fitted together with precision that would challenge modern engineering. More unsettling were the symbols carved into the granite blocks. Definitely not Romanian, not Cyrillic, not Latin-based. The characters seemed to flow like water, organic yet clearly linguistic. Some appeared to shimmer in her peripheral vision, though when she looked directly, they remained static. The mechanical humming grew stronger near the stone wall. Elena realized she was standing at the entrance to something vast and hidden, something that had been concealed here long enough for forests to grow over it, for streams to be diverted around it. Her training said to continue toward extraction, to report what she'd found through proper channels. But every instinct screamed that what lay beneath this forest was too important to risk losing in bureaucratic delays. She began searching for a way inside. The luminescent walls pulsed with a rhythm that reminded Sarah of a heartbeat. She pressed her palm against the smooth surface, feeling warmth emanate from within the stone itself. The light responded to her touch, brightening momentarily before returning to its steady glow. "This is impossible," she whispered, her voice echoing in the narrow tunnel. The architecture defied everything she knew about ancient civilizations. The walls curved seamlessly into the ceiling without visible joints, as if the entire passage had been carved from a single piece of living rock. She moved forward cautiously, her bare feet silent on the polished floor. The air grew warmer as she descended, carrying scents she couldn't identify, something between ozone and flowering jasmine. Behind her, the entrance remained visible as a distant circle of natural light, but ahead lay only the gentle blue-green radiance of the tunnel itself. After what felt like an hour of walking, the passage opened into a vast chamber that stole her breath. The space stretched beyond the reach of the ambient light, its ceiling lost in shadows high above. Crystalline formations jutted from the floor like frozen lightning, each one humming with barely audible frequency. At the chamber's center stood a structure that made Sarah's military training irrelevant. Nothing in her experience had prepared her for this. The building rose in spiraling tiers, its surface covered in symbols that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them as she approached. Details emerged that challenged her understanding of physics. Sections of the structure appeared to float independently, connected only by bridges of what looked like solidified light. A sound made her freeze, voices speaking in a language unlike anything she'd ever heard. The words flowed like water, melodic yet precise. Sarah dropped behind one of the crystal formations, her heart hammering as figures emerged from the far side of the chamber. They were unmistakably human, yet different in subtle ways that set her nerves on edge. Taller than average, with elongated limbs and features that suggested both ancient wisdom and unsettling youth. Their clothing appeared to be cut from the same luminescent material as the walls, shifting colors as they moved. 3 of them approached the central structure, their conversation becoming clearer as they drew near Sarah's hiding spot. Though she couldn't understand their words, their tone suggested urgency, perhaps even alarm. One gestured upward, toward the surface world she'd left behind. The largest of the three placed his hand against a smooth panel on the building's base. The structure responded immediately, patterns of light racing up its spiraling sides like veins of fire. Sarah watched in fascination as sections of the building became transparent, revealing a complex interior filled with moving shadows and dancing lights. What she saw next made her question her sanity. Images flickered within the transparent walls, scenes that looked like Earth but wrong somehow. Continents in impossible configurations, cities that defied gravity, creatures that belonged in nightmares rather than natural history. And threaded through it all, the same elongated figures she now watched, appearing to direct or influence events across millennia. The voices grew more agitated. One of the figures pointed directly at the chamber entrance Sarah had used, and her blood turned to ice. They knew she was here. She began backing away, keeping the crystal formation between herself and the strangers, but her foot struck a smaller crystal she hadn't noticed. The musical chime that resulted cut through the chamber like an alarm. The conversation stopped instantly. Sarah abandoned stealth and ran, her bare feet slapping against stone as she sprinted toward the tunnel entrance. Behind her, she heard rapid footsteps and more of the flowing language, urgent now and unmistakably giving chase. The tunnel seemed longer going back, the gentle upward slope feeling like a mountain climb. Her lungs burned, but adrenaline drove her forward. The circle of natural light grew larger, tantalizingly close, yet still too far away. A new sound reached her ears, a high-pitched whine that made her teeth ache. The tunnel walls began pulsing faster, their light shifting from blue-green to amber to red. Whatever was happening, she'd triggered something that went beyond simple pursuit. She burst from the tunnel opening just as the tree roots began sealing themselves behind her, moving with impossible speed to close the passage. Scrambling up the hollow trunk's interior, she could hear muffled voices from below, now cut off by what appeared to be solid wood. Sarah hauled herself out of the tree, gasping in the cool forest air. Dawn was breaking through the canopy, and in the growing light, everything looked normal. The ancient trunk showed no sign of the passage she'd just escaped from. She pressed her ear against the bark, listening for any sound from below. Nothing. Only the natural whisper of wind through leaves and the distant call of morning birds. But pressed into her palm was a small crystal fragment she didn't remember picking up, still warm and glowing faintly in the daylight. Physical proof that the underground world existed and that she'd stumbled onto something that could change everything humanity thought it knew about its own history. The rescue helicopter she'd been hoping for was finally audible in the distance, but Sarah realized her mission had just become infinitely more complicated. The descent into darkness felt endless. Sarah's fingers ached from gripping the rope woven from luminescent vines, each strand pulsing with that eerie blue-green glow. 20 feet below the tree's hollow base, the shaft continued downward, carved smooth as glass into living rock. The air grew cooler with each foot, carrying scents of mineral water and something else, something ancient and metallic that made her throat tight with unease. Her boots finally touched solid ground. The rope's phosphorescent light revealed a circular chamber no larger than her prison cell, but the walls curved away into passages that seemed to breathe with moving shadows. 3 tunnels branched off in different directions, each one humming with a low frequency she felt more than heard. Sarah released the vine rope and immediately missed its comforting glow. The darkness pressed against her like a living thing, absolute except for faint traces of that same blue luminescence emanating from veins in the rock walls. She pressed her palm against the nearest surface and jerked back. The stone was warm, almost feverish, and seemed to pulse beneath her touch. A sound echoed from the leftmost tunnel, not quite human but not entirely animal either, a rhythmic scraping like claws on stone, accompanied by what might have been whispered words in a language that predated any civilization she knew. Sarah's military training screamed at her to retreat, to climb back up and take her chances with her captors above ground. But the rope had already begun retracting into the tree's hollow, disappearing upward with deliberate purpose. She was trapped. The scraping grew closer. Sarah pressed herself against the warm stone wall and controlled her breathing, drawing on skills that had kept her alive through 18 months of interrogation and isolation. Her hand found a loose chunk of rock, not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. The phosphorescent veins pulsed brighter, as if responding to her elevated heart rate. A figure emerged from the left tunnel. Sarah's grip on the rock loosened. The being stood perhaps 6 feet tall, humanoid but wrong in proportions that hurt her eyes to study directly. Its limbs were too long, joints bending in directions that defied anatomy. Skin that might once have been pale now held a translucent quality, shot through with the same blue veins that decorated the walls. But the eyes were undeniably human, intelligent and filled with recognition. "You came through the listener's passage," the being said in perfect, unaccented English. Its voice carried harmonics that seemed to originate from multiple throats. "The tree chose you." Sarah found her voice. "What are you?" "I am Keeper Matthias, once of the surface, now of the deep. You carry marks of recent violence." Those unsettling eyes studied the bruises on her face, the crude bandages wrapped around her wrists. "Fleeing the loud ones above? The what?" "Your kind. We hear their machines, their weapons, their endless noise bleeding down through rock and root. They multiply like infection." Matthias tilted his head with bird-like curiosity. "But you fled them. Why?" Sarah weighed her options. Truth seemed safest with someone who clearly understood human conflict. "I'm a soldier. Was captured, escaped. Soldier." Matthias tasted the word. "A killer by trade? Sometimes?" "Good. You will need those skills here." The keeper gestured toward the right tunnel, where Sarah now noticed a warm breeze carrying complex scents, cooking food, burning oils, and the musk of many bodies. "The deep has need of surface knowledge. Your arrival is timely." As they walked, Matthias explained in fragments that raised more questions than answers. The deep was old, far older than recorded history. His people, he called them the adapted, had once been surface dwellers who discovered this place millennia ago. The transformation from human to whatever Matthias had become was gradual, irreversible, and necessary for survival in the lower reaches. "But we are dying," he admitted as they approached a glow that suggested vast open space ahead. "Cut off from the upper levels, our numbers dwindle. The hunters grow bold. Soon they will breach the barriers we have maintained for 3,000 years. Hunters? The true inhabitants of the deep. We are merely guests who overstayed our welcome." The tunnel opened into a cavern that stole Sarah's breath. The space was enormous, easily large enough to house a small city, which it apparently did. Structures carved from living rock rose in terraced levels, connected by bridges that spanned impossible distances. Phosphorescent veins formed a network of natural illumination, while cultivation areas held crops that glowed with their own inner light. And the people, hundreds of them in various stages of transformation, from human to something other. Some looked almost normal, aside from pale skin and enlarged eyes. Others, like Matthias, had progressed further into alien adaptation. A few moved through the shadows with such altered forms that Sarah could only catch glimpses before her mind refused to process what she was seeing. "Welcome to New Babylon," Matthias said, "the last city of the first world, and unless you help us, witness to the final chapter of both our species." The descent felt endless. Sarah's fingers ached from gripping the rope, her shoulders screaming in protest as she lowered herself into the abyss. The phosphorescent glow from below grew stronger with each foot, casting eerie shadows that danced along the cavern walls. The air grew cooler, carrying scents she couldn't identify, something metallic mixed with an organic mustiness that reminded her of deep forest floors. When her boots finally touched solid ground, Sarah found herself in a corridor carved from what appeared to be solid granite. The walls weren't rough-hewn like she'd expected, but polished smooth, their surfaces embedded with veins of the same luminescent material that had guided her down. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, far beyond anything she'd seen in the bombed-out ruins above. She released the rope and stepped forward, her movements echoing despite her efforts at stealth. The corridor stretched ahead, curving gently to the right. Along the walls she noticed intricate symbols carved deep into the stone, not like any alphabet she recognized, yet something about their flowing, interconnected patterns felt hauntingly familiar. Sarah pressed forward, one hand trailing along the cool wall for guidance. Her military training kicked in automatically, cataloging potential escape routes, noting the slight downward slope of the floor, the way the air moved in subtle currents that suggested this place was vast beyond imagination. The corridor opened into a chamber that stole her breath completely. She stood at the edge of what could only be described as an underground city. Structures rose from the cavern floor in organic spirals, their surfaces gleaming with that same ethereal light. Bridges of carved stone arced gracefully between buildings, creating a three-dimensional maze that defied conventional architecture. Everything curved and flowed like water frozen in time, as if the entire city had been grown rather than built. But it was the silence that unnerved her most. No voices, no footsteps, no mechanical hums. Just the soft whisper of air moving through passages and the distant sound of water dripping in steady rhythm. Sarah descended a series of carved steps that seemed to grow from the cavern wall itself. As she moved deeper into the city, details emerged that made her question everything she thought she knew about human history. The construction techniques, the materials, the sheer scale, this wasn't ancient in the way of Egyptian pyramids or Roman aqueducts. This felt older, far older, yet impossibly advanced. She paused beside what might have been a fountain, though no water flowed from its crystalline structure. Her reflection stared back from its surface, distorted and strange in the phosphorescent glow. For a moment, she could have sworn she saw other faces looking back, fleeting impressions that vanished when she focused on them directly. A sound made her freeze, footsteps, soft but unmistakably real, echoing from somewhere ahead. Sarah dropped into a crouch behind the fountain, her heart hammering against her ribs. She wasn't alone down here. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by voices speaking in low, melodic tones. The language was unlike anything she'd heard before, not the harsh consonants of her captor's tongue, but something that seemed to flow like music. Sarah risked a glance around the fountain's edge. 3 figures moved through the city with the easy confidence of familiarity. They were human, in basic shape, but different in subtle ways that her mind struggled to process. Taller than average, with elongated limbs that moved with liquid grace. Their skin held a faint luminescence, and their hair fell in colors that shifted between silver and deep blue in the strange light. They wore garments that seemed to be woven from the same material as the city itself, fabric that glowed softly and moved like liquid mercury. One of them gestured toward a structure Sarah hadn't noticed before, speaking in those musical tones while the others listened intently. Sarah pressed herself deeper into the shadows, barely daring to breathe. These weren't her captors. They weren't anyone from the world above. The implications crashed over her in waves that left her dizzy. This place, these people, they existed in a realm completely separate from the war raging on the surface. One of the figures turned in her direction, and Sarah caught a glimpse of features that were hauntingly beautiful, yet alien. Large eyes that seemed to hold depths of ancient knowledge, sharp cheekbones, and an expression of alertness that suggested enhanced senses. The being's head tilted slightly, as if listening to something Sarah couldn't hear. For a terrifying moment, she thought she'd been discovered. But the figure simply nodded to its companions and continued moving deeper into the city, their forms eventually disappearing behind one of the flowing architectural curves. Sarah remained motionless for long minutes, her mind reeling. She'd stumbled upon something that would rewrite everything humanity believed about itself. This wasn't just shelter from her enemies above. This was proof that Earth's history was far more complex and mysterious than anyone had imagined. But first, she had to survive long enough to tell someone about it. The stone steps spiraled deeper into the earth, each footfall echoing in the vast darkness ahead. Sarah's borrowed torch flickered against walls covered in intricate carvings that seemed to shift and dance in the unsteady light. Kyle moved beside her with fluid grace, his luminescent markings pulsing in rhythm with something she couldn't quite identify. Perhaps his heartbeat, or maybe the mountain itself. "Your people," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the soft scraping of their feet on ancient stone. "How long have you lived down here?" Time moves differently in the deep places. Kyle's response carried the weight of centuries. "Your surface world has turned many times while we have maintained the old ways. We remember when the sky fire fell, when the earth shook, when your kind first learned to walk upright." Sarah stumbled, catching herself against the wall. The carved stone felt warm beneath her palm, almost alive. "That's impossible. You're talking about—" "Millions of your years, yes." Kyle paused, turning to study her face in the torchlight. "Your scientists have found our bones, but they do not understand what they see. They create stories about evolution, about natural selection, never realizing they are looking at the remnants of a war that reshaped your world." The tunnel opened into a cavern so vast that Sarah's torch couldn't illuminate the far walls. Suspended bridges of woven metal stretched across gaps that disappeared into shadow. Below, phosphorescent streams carved channels through terraced gardens where impossible plants grew in spiraling patterns. The air hummed with energy she could feel in her bones. "This is just the outer ring," Kyle explained, gesturing toward the impossible architecture. "The true city lies beyond, in chambers your surface dwellers cannot imagine." Sarah gripped the torch tighter, her military training warring with the evidence of her senses. "If your civilization is so advanced, why haven't you contacted us? Why hide?" "Because of what happened the last time we shared our knowledge." Kyle's expression darkened. "Your myths speak of it. Floods that covered the earth, fire from heaven, the fall of paradise. They are not myths, Sarah Chen. They are warnings." They crossed the first bridge, the metal singing softly under their weight. Below, Sarah glimpsed movement in the gardens, figures tending to the strange plants with tools that gleamed like captured starlight. Some looked human enough, but others moved with too many joints, or had limbs that bent in ways that made her eyes water. "The confluence," Kyle said, noticing her stare. "When worlds meet, change is inevitable. Not all of your ancestors chose to remain purely human." Sarah's comm device crackled to life, making both of them freeze. Through the static came fragments of voices, her extraction team searching for her signal. The sound seemed obscene in this place of ancient silence. "They're looking for me," she whispered, instinctively moving to respond. Kyle's hand closed over hers, stopping her. "If they find this place, if they report what they see, the old patterns will repeat. Your governments will want to claim our technology. Your military will want to weaponize what we have protected for millennia. You don't understand." Sarah pulled away, frustration building. "I'm a soldier. I have a duty, as did the ones who came before." Kyle's voice carried infinite sadness. They also spoke of duty, of the greater good. They also believed they could control what they did not understand. The comm crackled again, clearer now. "Phoenix 1, this is command. Respond if you're receiving. Your GPS signal has been dark for 18 hours. Sarah stared at the device, then at Kyle's glowing features. 18 hours? But we've only been walking for— "Time moves differently here," he repeated. "The deeper chambers exist outside your linear progression. What feels like moments to us may be days to your world above." The implications hit her like a physical blow. Her extraction window was closing. If she didn't respond soon, Command would assume she was dead or captured. The mission would be scrubbed, but more teams would come looking. "There is another way," Kyle said quietly, but it requires trust. What kind of trust? The kind your species has never been capable of. He gestured toward the depths of the cavern, where more bridges led to structures that defied geometry. Come with us to the deep chambers. See what we protect. Understand why the surface world must not learn of us. Then decide whether your duty lies with your superiors or with something far greater. Sarah looked at the comm device in her hand, then at the impossible city stretching into darkness. Every instinct screamed that she was being manipulated, drawn into something beyond her comprehension. But the alternative was to climb back up those stairs, return to the tree, and pretend none of this existed. The torch flame wavered as if responding to her uncertainty. In its dancing light, the city below seemed to pulse with patient life, waiting for her decision. She turned off the comm device. Sarah's hands trembled as she stared at the carved stone tablet, its ancient symbols seeming to pulse with otherworldly energy in the bioluminescent glow. Elder Kithara moved closer, her translucent fingers hovering over the intricate markings that covered nearly every inch of the massive wall. "This tells of the great fracture," Kithara whispered, her voice carrying the weight of millennia. "When your people first walked the surface, mine were forced to retreat into the depths of the earth." The underground chamber stretched beyond what Sarah's eyes could perceive, its vaulted ceiling disappearing into shadows despite the ethereal light emanating from crystalline formations. She pressed her palm against the cool stone, feeling vibrations that seemed to echo through her bones. "Forced by what?" Sarah asked, though part of her already dreaded the answer. Kithara's luminescent eyes dimmed slightly. "By those who came before your civilization. The ones your surface dwellers have forgotten, but who never forgot about us." She gestured to a section of the tablet where humanoid figures towered over smaller beings, their faces bearing expressions of cruel dominance. "They hunted us, enslaved those they could capture, and drove the survivors deep underground." Sarah studied the carvings more carefully, noting details that made her stomach clench. The dominating figures wore what appeared to be advanced armor and carried weapons that looked nothing like primitive tools. "When did this happen?" 12,000 of your surface years ago, perhaps more. Time moves differently in the depths. Kithara touched a symbol that resembled a spiral descending into darkness. "We adapted to life below, evolved to thrive in places your people cannot imagine. But we never forgot the taste of sunlight or the cost of losing it." A soft chiming sound echoed through the chamber, and Sarah noticed other figures emerging from passages she hadn't seen before. The subterraneans moved with fluid grace, their elongated limbs and pale, almost translucent skin making them appear ghost-like in the shifting light. Each carried what looked like living technology, devices that pulsed with the same bioluminescence that lit their domain. "The Council has agreed to reveal more," one of the newcomers announced, its voice carrying musical undertones that human vocal cords couldn't produce. "The surface dweller must understand what she carries." Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her jacket pocket, where she'd stored the strange device she'd found in her cell. "What do you mean, what I carry?" Elder Kithara nodded gravely. "The object you discovered was not placed in your prison by accident. It is a beacon designed to activate when touched by human hands. Those who imprisoned you knew exactly what they were doing." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her escape, her flight to the forest, her discovery of this underground world, none of it had been chance. "They wanted me to find you." "Yes, but not for the reasons you might think." Kithara moved to another section of the wall where the carvings showed scenes of massive structures rising from the earth, cities of impossible architecture breaching the surface world. "The beacon was meant to locate our civilization so they could complete what their ancestors began." Sarah's military training kicked in as she processed the tactical nightmare unfolding before her. "They're planning an attack." "More than that," another council member interjected, stepping forward with a device that projected three-dimensional images into the air above their hands. The hologram showed a network of underground passages spanning continents, connecting vast cities filled with millions of subterranean inhabitants. They seek to claim our technology, our resources, our very existence for their own purposes. The projected images shifted, revealing surface installations that Sarah recognized from her military briefings. Research facilities, mining operations, deep excavation projects, all positioned directly above major subterranean settlements. "How long have you known?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We have been monitoring surface activities for decades, but until now we believed our concealment was complete." Kithara's expression grew more serious. The beacon changed everything. It not only revealed our location, but activated dormant systems throughout our realm. Every major settlement now glows like a lighthouse to anyone with the proper detection equipment. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like lead. "I've doomed your entire civilization." "Perhaps," Elder Kithara acknowledged, without attempting false comfort. "But you have also given us something we have lacked for millennia. Advance warning and a potential ally who understands the surface world's capabilities." The chamber fell silent except for the gentle humming of the crystalline light sources. Sarah looked around at the assembled subterraneans, seeing in their ancient faces a mixture of fear, hope, and determination that mirrored her own feelings. "What happens now?" she asked. Kithara moved closer, placing a hand on Sarah's shoulder. The touch sent warmth through her body, along with something else. Images, thoughts, knowledge flowing directly into her mind. She saw the true scope of the underground civilization, felt the depth of their connection to the earth itself, understood the catastrophic consequences if their world fell into the wrong hands. "Now," Kithara said softly, "we prepare for war." The crystalline chamber stretched endlessly in all directions, its walls pulsing with that same ethereal blue light that had first drawn Sarah into this impossible world. Elder Zephyra moved with fluid grace across the polished floor, her elongated fingers trailing luminescent patterns in the air as she spoke. "Your species calls it the Great Dying," Zephyra said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in Sarah's bones. 252 million years ago, when 90% of all life vanished from your surface world." Sarah struggled to process the timeline. Everything she thought she knew about human history crumbled with each revelation. But humans didn't exist then. We evolved millions of years later. "Did you?" The elder's silver eyes fixed on Sarah with unsettling intensity. "Or did you simply return?" The chamber around them began to shift, the walls becoming transparent, revealing vast archives stretching into darkness. Towering shells contained objects Sarah couldn't identify. Some appeared to be made of the same crystal as the walls, others seemed to be composed of living metal that writhed slowly in preservation fields. "The architects left more than just warnings," Zephyra continued, gesturing toward the archives. "They left instructions, genetic templates, the blueprint for restoration." A chill ran down Sarah's spine as the implications sank in. "You're saying humans are, what, some kind of reconstruction project?" "Not just humans." Zephyra's expression grew grave. "All surface life. The entire biosphere you know is built upon the foundation of what came before. But the architect's tampering created instabilities, flaws in the genetic code that would eventually surface." The elder led Sarah deeper into the archive, past rows of crystalline storage units. Through their transparent surfaces, Sarah glimpsed fragments of impossible things, what looked like star charts of unknown constellations, mechanical devices that defied physics, and disturbing organic samples suspended in glowing fluid. "The surface dwellers have begun to manifest these flaws," Zephyra explained. "Wars that make no logical sense, driven by compulsions coded into your very DNA. Technological advancement racing toward the same catastrophic end that destroyed the original civilization. You are repeating patterns laid down in your genetic memory." Sarah thought of the brutal efficiency of her captors, the senseless violence she'd witnessed, the inexplicable human capacity for destruction, even in the face of mutual annihilation. That's why the war started, why we can't seem to stop fighting. One symptom among many. Your reproductive cycles are accelerating, birth rates climbing exponentially despite resource scarcity. Your immune systems are becoming hyperactive, attacking your own bodies. And your brain chemistry. Zephyra paused before a particularly large crystal containing what appeared to be a human skull, but wrong somehow, with too many sutures and an elongated cranium. The original template is reasserting itself. The pieces click together with terrifying clarity. The missing soldiers, the ones who disappeared from both sides. They're changing, aren't they? Zephyra nodded slowly. Evolution accelerated beyond natural limits always seeks correction. Some of your kind are reverting to the pre-catastrophe template. Others are developing entirely new adaptations as their altered genetics attempt to stabilize, most simply, break. Images flashed through the crystal walls around them, surveillance footage from the surface world that the Kithara had somehow obtained. Sarah saw figures moving with inhuman speed through devastated cities, their forms distorted and wrong. Groups of humans exhibiting impossible coordination, as if controlled by a collective consciousness. And worse things, mutations so extreme they barely registered as having once been human. This is happening now? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, accelerating with each generation. Your military commanders attribute the disappearances to new weapons, enhanced interrogation techniques, psychological warfare. They have no framework to understand what they're truly witnessing. The archive chamber suddenly resonated with a deep harmonic tone that Sarah felt in her chest. Zephyra's expression shifted to one of alarm as she touched a crystal panel that materialized from the wall. "The surface sensors detect movement," Zephyra said, her graceful composure cracking. "Large formations approaching the forest above us." Sarah's heart raced. My people? A rescue mission? Unknown. But their advanced patterns suggest they are not entirely human anymore. Zephyra's silver eyes met Sarah's. The question becomes whether you wish to return to a world that may no longer recognize you as one of its own, or help us prevent the same catastrophe that destroyed the architects. A harmonic tone grew louder, more urgent. Through the crystal walls, Sarah could see Kithara moving with sudden purpose through the deeper tunnels, their luminescent forms creating rivers of light in the darkness. "What would I have to do?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer would change her forever. Zephyra's expression held both sadness and hope. "Help us reach the remaining archive sites before the surface dwellers destroy them. The genetic templates can be corrected, but only if we can access the original programming matrices." Above them, the first explosions began. The crystalline walls of the ancient chamber hummed with an energy that made Sarah's teeth ache. She pressed herself against the smooth surface, watching as Commander Chen and his extraction team descended into the cavern below. Their tactical lights swept across formations that defied everything she thought she knew about human civilization. "This changes everything," whispered Dr. Vasquez, the archaeologist Chen had brought along. The woman's voice carried up from the depths, filled with reverence and terror. "These structures predate Göbekli Tepe by millennia." Sarah's fingers traced the luminescent veins running through the wall behind her. The patterns weren't random. They formed intricate circuits that pulsed with bioluminescent light, responding to her touch like living neural networks. When she'd first discovered this place while fleeing her captors, she'd thought she was hallucinating from blood loss and exhaustion. Now, watching a team of experts react with the same awe and disbelief, she knew the impossible had become reality. A sudden movement in the shadows below caught her attention. The keepers were returning. The beings moved with fluid grace between the towering structures, their elongated forms seeming to phase in and out of visibility. Sarah had learned to recognize their approach by the subtle shift in the chamber's harmonic frequency, a deep thrumming that resonated in her bones. She'd spent 3 days hiding among their city before Chen's team arrived, observing their rituals, trying to understand their purpose. They weren't hostile, she'd realized. They were guardians. Contact! Contact! The sharp voice of Sergeant Morrison echoed through the cavern as the soldiers spotted the approaching figures. Multiple unknowns moving to engage. "Stand down!" Sarah's voice cracked as she called out from her perch. "Don't fire! They're not attacking!" Chen's head snapped up, his expression shifting from tactical alertness to something approaching relief. "Martinez, get down here now!" But Sarah was already moving, rappelling down the chamber wall using techniques learned during her years in special forces. She dropped between the soldiers and the keepers just as Morrison's finger tightened on his trigger. "They're protecting something," she said, breathing hard. "Something they've been guarding for thousands of years." The lead keeper stepped forward, its features becoming clearer in the harsh LED lighting. The being's face was unmistakably humanoid, yet elongated, with large eyes that held depths of intelligence, that made Sarah's skin crawl with recognition. This was what humanity might have become, given different evolutionary pressures. It spoke in harmonic tones that seemed to bypass the ears entirely, vibrating through the crystalline structures around them. Dr. Vasquez gasped, pulling out her recording equipment. "It's not just sound," the archaeologist whispered. "The entire chamber is amplifying their communication. They're using the crystal matrix as a transmission medium." Sarah found herself understanding fragments of the message, though she couldn't explain how. Images flashed in her mind, great cities beneath the earth, connected by networks of tunnels that spanned continents. A civilization that had retreated underground when the surface world became too dangerous, too unstable, too violent. "They've been watching us," Sarah translated, the words coming from some deep intuition she didn't fully trust. "Waiting to see if we'd evolve past our destructive phase." Chen stepped forward, his weapon lowered but ready. "Ask them about the other sites, the coordinates we found in your initial report. Are there more locations like this?" Before Sarah could respond, the keeper gestured toward the far wall of the chamber. The crystalline surface began to shift, reconfiguring itself into a three-dimensional map that hung in the air like a hologram. Points of light appeared across the globe, dozens of them, marking hidden cities beneath major population centers. "My God," Dr. Vasquez breathed. "They're everywhere. Under New York, London, Beijing. They've been living beneath us this entire time." The keeper's harmonic voice grew more urgent, and Sarah felt a chill of understanding wash over her. The images in her mind shifted to show surface conflicts, wars, environmental destruction, the gradual poisoning of the planet. The underground civilization wasn't just hiding from humanity, they were preparing for humanity's eventual collapse. And they were running out of time. "They're offering to help," Sarah said, the words feeling strange in her mouth. "But there's a condition. We have to prove we're ready to change, to move beyond the cycles of violence that have defined our species." Chen's expression hardened. "What kind of proof?" The keeper gestured again, and the crystalline map zoomed in on a specific location, a site in the mountains of Afghanistan not far from where Sarah had been held prisoner. She recognized the coordinates immediately. "The weapons cache," she whispered, "the biological weapons the terrorists were developing. They know about them." The message was clear. The underground civilization would reveal themselves and share their advanced technology, but only if humanity could prove its commitment to peace, by eliminating the very weapons that had led to Sarah's capture in the first place. The rescue mission had become something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The crystalline chamber hummed with an energy that made Sarah's teeth ache. Ancient symbols carved into the walls pulsed with a soft blue light, casting dancing shadows across the faces of the Council of Echoes. 7 figures sat in a semicircle before her, their elongated features bearing the mark of millennia spent in the Earth's depths. "You speak of war above," the eldest counselor said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "But do you understand what your kind fights over?" Sarah shifted uncomfortably. acutely aware of Marcus standing rigid beside her. The soldier's hand hadn't left his sidearm since they'd been escorted into this sacred space 3 levels deeper than she'd thought possible. The air here tasted different, older, charged with something that made her skin tingle. Resources, territory. The usual human motivations, Sarah replied, though even as she spoke, doubt crept into her voice. The knowing looks exchanged between the counselors suggested her answer was laughably incomplete. "Show her," commanded the eldest, gesturing toward a section of wall that appeared solid stone. The chamber's hum intensified, and the wall began to shift, stone flowing like water to reveal a vast window overlooking an impossible sight. Below them stretched a city that defied everything Sarah thought she knew about architecture, about physics, about the very nature of reality. Spires twisted upward in impossible spirals, connected by bridges of what looked like crystallized light. Streams of luminescent water flowed upward through the air, feeding gardens that hung suspended without visible support. "This is Athros, the first city," the counselor continued, "built when your ancestors were still learning to make fire. We are the Veil Keepers, guardians of the boundary between what your people call reality and what truly is." Marcus stepped forward, his military training overriding his awe. "Guardian of what boundary? What are you talking about?" Another counselor, younger but no less ancient by human standards, rose from her seat. "Your surface wars are not about land or resources, soldier. They are about power, the power that seeps upward from the deep places. Your leaders may not understand it consciously, but they are drawn to the sources, the ley lines that your kind build their cities upon, the sacred sites they fight to control." Sarah felt the pieces of a massive puzzle beginning to shift in her mind. The strange energy readings that had drawn military attention to this region, the way her compass had spun wildly before she'd found the tree, the unexplained phenomena reported by soldiers on both sides of the conflict. "You're saying our war is somehow connected to this place?" "Not connected," the eldest corrected. "Caused by. The barriers weaken, power bleeds through. It drives your kind to madness, to violence. The closer to the source, the stronger the effect." The wall shifted again, showing them a 3-dimensional map of the region above. Lines of energy crisscrossed the terrain like a vast web, with their current location at the center. Sarah recognized landmarks, the battlefield where she'd been captured, the prison camp, the tree that had saved her life. All of them sat directly on these energy lines. "The tree," she whispered, "that's how I found you." "The sentinel tree has stood for 3,000 years, the young counselor explained. "It serves as both guardian and gateway. It called to you because it sensed what you carry." "What I carry?" Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her chest, where the strange warmth she'd felt since entering this place seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. The eldest counselor stood, moving with fluid grace despite her apparent age. "You are not the first surface dweller to find us, Sarah Chen, but you are the first to arrive at such a crucial time. The barriers that have protected both our worlds for millennia are failing. Soon, the choice will be forced upon us, revelation or catastrophe." Marcus's tactical mind was racing. "You're talking about contact, full disclosure, the surface world learning about your existence." "More than that," the counselor replied grimly. "We speak of integration or annihilation. The power that bleeds through will continue to intensify. Your wars will spread, consuming everything until there is nothing left to fight over, unless—" "Unless what?" Sarah demanded. "Unless someone can serve as a bridge, someone who has walked in both worlds and can help us find a path forward that doesn't end in mutual destruction." The chamber fell silent except for the omnipresent humming. Sarah felt the weight of thousands of years of hidden history pressing down on her, along with the terrible understanding of what was being asked. "You want me to be that bridge?" "We want you to choose," the eldest said simply. "You can return to your surface, resume your life, and watch as the chaos consumes everything you hold dear. Or you can stay, learn our ways, and help us forge a new path forward." Sarah looked at Marcus, seeing her own confusion and fear reflected in his eyes. Above them, a war raged that was apparently just the beginning of something far worse. Below them lay secrets that could save or damn the world. The choice would define not just her fate, but humanity's future. The crystalline chamber stretched endlessly in all directions, its walls pulsing with bioluminescent veins that seemed to breathe with an ancient rhythm. Maya pressed herself against the smooth surface, her heart hammering as footsteps echoed from the tunnel behind her. The subterrans were closing in, their elongated shadows dancing across the luminous walls like specters from another world. She clutched the data device Kyle had given her, its alien markings still warm against her palm. The weight of what she'd learned pressed down on her chest. Humanity's true origins, the surface world as merely a testing ground, the coming convergence that would reshape everything. But first, she had to survive the next 5 minutes. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by a chittering language that made her skin crawl. Maya scanned the chamber desperately, searching for another exit. The walls appeared seamless except for thin fissures that glowed brighter than the rest. As she approached one, it responded to her proximity, widening just enough for her to squeeze through. The passage beyond was narrower, forcing her to move in a crouch. Phosphorescent moss carpeted the floor, muffling her movements but leaving a faint trail of disturbed spores in her wake. She could only hope the subterrans wouldn't notice before she found a way to the surface. The tunnel branched repeatedly, creating a labyrinth that seemed designed to confuse intruders. Maya chose her path based on subtle air currents, following anything that might lead upward. Her military training kicked in, marking corners and counting steps to maintain her bearings in this alien underground. A distant roar made her freeze. The sound was unlike anything she'd heard before, part mechanical, part organic, wholly terrifying. It reverberated through the stone, causing the luminescent veins to flicker like a failing electrical system. Whatever made that noise was massive, and it was getting closer. Maya picked up her pace, no longer concerned about stealth. The passage ahead opened into another chamber, this one filled with towering structures that resembled a cross between coral reefs and computer servers. They hummed with energy, their surfaces covered in flowing symbols that shifted and changed as she watched. Standing among them was a figure in familiar fatigues, Jackson, one of her fellow prisoners. Relief flooded through her until she noticed his posture, the unnatural stillness of his stance. As he turned toward her, she saw the silver threading beneath his skin, the vacant look in his eyes that spoke of complete neural integration. Maya Patterson, identification confirmed. His voice was his own, but layered with harmonic undertones. "You will submit to processing." She backed away, raising her hands defensively. "Jackson, it's me. We were captured together. Remember the camp? Remember Sarah and Martinez?" Previous identity patterns archived. Current function, retrieval, and integration. He stepped forward with mechanical precision, no trace of recognition in his expression. The roaring sound erupted again, much closer now. The chamber's structures pulsed in response, their humming rising to an almost painful frequency. Maya could feel it in her bones, a vibration that seemed to target something fundamental in her cellular structure. She feinted left, then dove right as Jackson lunged with inhuman speed. Her combat training served her well, but he was faster now, stronger, enhanced by whatever the subterrans had done to him. His hand caught her shoulder, spinning her around with enough force to slam her into one of the humming structures. The impact sent shockwaves through the device network. Symbols cascaded down the surfaces like digital rain, and several structures flickered before going dark. An alarm began wailing, a sound that seemed to bypass her ears and resonate directly in her brain. Jackson hesitated, his head tilting as if receiving new instructions. In that moment of distraction, Maya spotted movement in the shadows between the structures. More figures emerged, other prisoners she recognized, all bearing the same silver threading, the same empty stare. The roaring sound was deafening now, accompanied by tremors that shook dust from the chamber ceiling. Whatever was coming would arrive soon, and Maya doubted she wanted to meet it. She clutched Kyle's device tighter, remembering his final words about finding the truth. These neural integrations, the processing Jackson mentioned, it was all connected to the convergence, to humanity's role in whatever the Subterrans had planned. The enhanced prisoners formed a circle around her, moving with coordinated precision. But as they closed in, Maya noticed something else, tears streaming down Jackson's face even as his expression remained blank. Somewhere inside that networked shell, her friend was still fighting. "I'm sorry," she whispered, then activated the emergency beacon hidden in her belt. The signal would alert any surface forces to her location, but it would also bring the full attention of the Subterran civilization down upon her. The roaring reached a crescendo as something massive entered the chamber. Maya caught a glimpse of biomechanical tentacles and crystalline armor before the lights went out, plunging everything into absolute darkness. In the silence that followed, she heard only her own breathing and the soft hum of alien technology preparing for humanity's next phase of evolution. The crystalline chamber stretched impossibly high above them, its walls pulsing with an ethereal blue light that seemed to breathe with the rhythm of something ancient and alive. Sarah pressed herself against the smooth surface, her military training warring with the awe that threatened to overwhelm her senses. Marcus stood frozen beside her, his archaeological expertise apparently useless in the face of what defied every textbook he'd ever studied. "The readings are off the charts," whispered Dr. Chen, her voice barely audible as she adjusted the specialized equipment they'd brought down from the surface. "This technology predates anything in the historical record by millennia." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the vast space, and Sarah immediately shifted into tactical mode. She'd spent weeks evading capture above ground, but down here in this underground realm, the rules had changed completely. The Kithera, as the inhabitants called themselves, moved with a fluid grace that suggested they were as comfortable in these crystalline corridors as humans were on solid earth. "They're coming back," Marcus breathed, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. "Sarah, what they showed us about human history, if any of this gets out—" "I know." Sarah's mind raced through the implications of what they'd learned in the past few hours. The Kithera hadn't just been observers of human civilization, they'd been its shepherds, guiding key moments in development while remaining hidden in their vast subterranean cities. The prisoner of war camp where she'd been held wasn't just a military installation. It was positioned directly above one of their primary access points. A figure emerged from the shifting light patterns ahead, tall and luminescent, with features that seemed almost human, but refined beyond anything nature had produced on the surface. Elder Varix approached with that same unsettling serenity that had marked all their interactions with these beings. "You have seen the Chronicles," Varix said, his voice resonating through the chamber without seeming to come from any particular direction. "Your surface conflicts are but ripples in a much deeper current. The question now becomes what you will do with this knowledge." Sarah stepped forward, drawing on every ounce of her military bearing. "Our people deserve to know the truth. Humanity has a right to understand its real history." "Do they?" Another figure materialized from the shadows, Keeper Lyran, whose role seemed to involve maintaining the delicate balance between their world and the surface. "Your species wages war over resources that could feed your entire population. You destroy your environment while possessing the knowledge to heal it. What makes you believe this revelation would unite rather than further divide you?" Dr. Chen looked up from her instruments, her scientific objectivity cracking under the weight of what they'd discovered. "The genetic markers, the technological artifacts embedded in your architecture, this proves human evolution was guided, not random. This changes everything about how we understand ourselves. And that knowledge in the wrong hands." Lyran's expression remained impassive, but Sarah caught something that might have been sadness in those ancient eyes. "Your governments, your military leaders, they would seek to exploit us, to weaponize what we've built over countless generations." The truth of that statement hit Sarah like a physical blow. She thought of Colonel Reeves, of the brutal efficiency of the prisoner of war facility above. The same minds that had created those conditions would see the Kythera as either a threat to be eliminated or a resource to be controlled. Marcus moved closer to one of the wall displays, where images of human history played out in configurations of light. But hiding down here forever isn't sustainable either. Climate change, nuclear proliferation. If humanity destroys itself, what becomes of your civilization? That concern has occupied our councils for decades, Varix admitted. We have invested too much in your species' development to watch it self-destruct. Yet direct intervention risks exposure, and exposure risks everything we've built. Sarah felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders. Above them, search teams were certainly looking for the missing prisoners. Her military training demanded she find a way back to friendly forces, complete her mission, report what she'd found. But every instinct developed over years of combat told her that following protocol in this situation could trigger consequences beyond imagination. There has to be a third option, she said finally. Some way to bridge our worlds without destroying either one. The Kythera exchanged glances, or what passed for glances among beings who seemed to communicate as much through the shifting patterns of light around them as through spoken words. Finally, Varix stepped forward. There may be, but it would require unprecedented trust from both our peoples, and it would make you, Sarah Henderson, the keeper of humanity's most dangerous secret. As the chamber's luminescence seemed to pulse brighter, Sarah realized that her escape from the prison camp had been just the beginning. The real test of her survival skills was about to begin, and the stakes were nothing less than the future of two civilizations. The elevator descended through layers of earth and stone, each level revealing more of the Vitharans' impossible architecture. Sarah pressed her face against the transparent walls, watching as they passed chambers carved from living rock, their surfaces gleaming with the same bioluminescent patterns that had guided her through the tunnels above. Your surface dwellers call it the hollow earth theory, Zara explained, her voice carrying a note of amusement. They were closer to the truth than they knew. Marcus remained silent beside Sarah, his jaw clenched as he absorbed the magnitude of their situation. The other rescued prisoners, 6 soldiers from various military units, stood in stunned silence, their faces pale in the ethereal blue light. "How far down are we going?" Sarah asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted the answer. 7 kilometers below your surface level, Zara replied. The city of Nethys has stood here for 12,000 years, since long before your civilizations learned to work metal. The elevator shuddered to a halt, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Through the transparent walls, she could see a vista that defied every law of physics she knew. A vast cavern stretched before them, its ceiling lost in darkness despite the countless points of light that dotted its surface like stars. But it wasn't the size that made her gasp, it was the city itself. Spires of crystal and stone rose from the cavern floor, their surfaces alive with flowing patterns of light. Bridges of what appeared to be solidified energy connected floating platforms, while streams of luminescent water cascaded upward, defying gravity as they wound between the structures. In the distance, Sarah could make out figures moving along the pathways, tall, graceful forms that walked with an otherworldly elegance. "Welcome to Nethys," Zara said, stepping forward as the elevator doors dissolved into motes of light. "The last free city of the Vitharans." They emerged onto a platform of smooth, warm stone that hummed with an almost musical resonance. The air here was different, cleaner somehow, charged with an energy that made Sarah's skin tingle. She could hear the soft murmur of voices speaking in the melodious language she'd first encountered with Zara, punctuated by sounds that had no earthly equivalent. "This is impossible," Marcus whispered, his scientific training warring with the evidence of his eyes. The pressure alone, the heat from the Earth's core. "Your understanding of planetary geology is limited by your technology," Zara said gently. The Earth is not the solid sphere your scientists believe it to be. There are spaces, chambers, entire worlds within worlds that your instruments cannot detect. A group of veterans approached them across the platform, their movements fluid and purposeful. Sarah noticed that while they shared Zara's basic humanoid form, there were subtle differences, variations in height, in the patterns of luminescence that played across their skin, in the structure of their faces. One of them, a tall figure with intricate silver markings, spoke rapidly to Zara in their native tongue. Zara's expression darkened as she listened. "We must move quickly," she said, turning back to the humans. "The Devourers have been more active since your surface conflict began. They feed on violence, on fear, and the emotions emanating from your world war have drawn them closer to both our realm and yours." "What exactly are these Devourers?" Sarah asked as they began walking toward the city proper. The path beneath their feet seemed to respond to their presence, glowing more brightly with each step. "Ancient enemies," Zara replied. "They come from the spaces between worlds, drawn to consciousness like moths to flame. But they do not simply destroy, they corrupt, transform, consume the very essence of intelligent life. Your surface war has created a beacon that calls to them across the void." As they moved deeper into the city, Sarah began to understand the true scope of veteran civilization. This wasn't just a hidden refuge, it was a thriving metropolis with its own culture, technology, and society. She saw gardens of crystalline plants that chimed softly in the artificial breeze, libraries where books made of condensed light floated in mid-air, workshops where artisans shaped reality itself with tools that hummed with power. "How many of you are there?" Marcus asked, his voice filled with wonder despite his obvious unease. "Here in Nethys, perhaps 50,000, Zara said. "But we are not the only survivors. There are other cities, other refuges scattered throughout the deep places of the earth. We are the remnants of a civilization that once spanned continents before the first Devourer incursion drove us underground." They paused at the edge of a vast plaza where hundreds of veterans had gathered. In the center, a holographic display showed what Sarah recognized as the Earth's surface, but it was overlaid with pulsing red marks that seemed to writhe and spread like infection. "The breach points," Zara explained grimly. "Places where the Devourers are beginning to push through into your reality. Your war has weakened the barriers between dimensions, and soon they will have enough anchor points to begin their harvest in earnest." Sarah stared at the display, cold dread settling in her stomach as she realized the truth. Her escape from the enemy camp had been just the beginning. The real war, the one that would determine the fate of both species, was about to begin. Sarah's hands trembled as she held the crystalline device Kyle had given her, its surface pulsing with an ethereal blue light that seemed to respond to her heartbeat. The Council of Depths had made their decision. She would be the bridge between two worlds, carrying knowledge that could either save humanity or destroy it entirely. "The surface dwellers must be prepared gradually," Elder Naya had warned, her ancient eyes reflecting centuries of hidden wisdom. "Too much, too fast, and your kind will panic. Wars have been fought over far less than the truth we're entrusting to you." Now, standing at the base of the great spiral pathway that would take her back to the surface, Sarah felt the weight of that responsibility crushing down on her shoulders. Behind her, the underground city of Athros hummed with activity as its inhabitants prepared for a revelation that would shatter everything the world thought it knew about human history. Marcus approached, his military bearings somehow both familiar and foreign after everything they'd witnessed together. "The tunnel system connects to 17 different points across 4 continents," he said, consulting a map etched on what appeared to be living stone. "Command needs to know which extraction point you'll use." Sarah studied the glowing pathways marked on the surface. Each route represented thousands of years of careful construction, hidden arteries that had allowed the Ethrosians to monitor and occasionally influence surface events without ever revealing themselves. The sheer scope of it was staggering. Here, She pointed to a location near the Swiss Alps. It's isolated, defensible, and close enough to civilization that I can reach the right people quickly. Kael materialized beside them with that unsettling silence his people had mastered. The Watchers have reported unusual activity on the surface. Your military forces are mobilizing, searching. They believe you're dead. The irony wasn't lost on her. In many ways, the Sarah Mitchell who had fallen into that tree seeking shelter from enemy forces was dead. The woman standing here now carried secrets that would make her a target for every government, every extremist group, every power-hungry individual who learned of Ethros's existence. There's something else, Kael continued, his expression darkening. The seismic events that first opened the pathway to your world, they weren't random. Our deep sensors detected artificial resonance patterns. Someone on the surface has been deliberately weakening the barriers between our realms. Sarah's blood ran cold. Meaning what, exactly? Meaning this wasn't an accident. Someone up there knows about us and has been trying to break through for some time. Your arrival simply provided an opportunity they'd been creating. The implications hit her like a physical blow. Her capture, her desperate flight through the jungle, even her decision to hide in that particular tree. How much of it had been orchestrated? And by whom? Marcus's training kicked in immediately. We need to assume hostile intent and plan accordingly. If someone's been actively seeking contact with Ethros, they likely have resources and connections we can't anticipate. Elder Naya approached, her flowing robes rustling across the crystalline floor. This changes our timeline considerably. If surface forces are already aware of the pathways, isolation is no longer an option. She fixed Sarah with an intense stare. You must reach your allies before our enemies find them. Sarah nodded, slipping the communication device into her jacket's inner pocket. The crystal felt warm against her ribs, a constant reminder of the trust being placed in her. Around them, Ethrosian technicians were making final preparations, loading her pack with supplies that looked deceptively mundane but contained technology centuries ahead of anything on the surface. Remember, Kael said, placing a hand on her shoulder, you're not just carrying information, you're carrying hope. Our civilizations have existed in parallel for millennia, but the challenges ahead will require cooperation neither of us can imagine. The transport vessel waited at the tunnel entrance, a sleek craft that moved through the underground waterways with impossible speed and silence. Sarah had made this journey once before as a prisoner, unconscious and dying. Now she traveled as an ambassador to a world that didn't yet know it needed one. As Athros disappeared behind them, swallowed by the tunnel's curved walls, Sarah closed her eyes and tried to organize her thoughts. She would need to be strategic about her revelations, careful about whom she trusted. The wrong word to the wrong person could trigger a catastrophic first contact scenario that would doom both civilizations. The crystal pulsed against her chest, and for a moment she could swear she heard whispers, not Kael's voice, but something older, deeper. The collective wisdom of Athros itself, perhaps, offering guidance for the impossible task ahead. When she opened her eyes, phosphorescent markers along the tunnel walls indicated they were ascending rapidly. Soon she would break the surface into a world transformed by knowledge, carrying secrets that would redefine humanity's place in its own history. The real mission was just beginning. The ancient chamber hummed with an energy that made Sarah's teeth ache. Crystalline formations jutting from the walls pulsed with bioluminescent light, casting shifting shadows that seemed to writhe with their own intelligence. Dr. Reeves stood transfixed before a massive stone tablet covered in the same spiraling script they'd encountered throughout the underground city, his fingers tracing symbols that predated recorded human history by millennia. The linguistic patterns are consistent with Proto-Sumerian, but the mathematical sequences— He turned to Sarah, his face pale in the eerie light. This isn't just a historical record, it's a countdown. Sarah felt her blood turn to ice. Countdown to what? Before Reeves could answer, the sound of boots echoing through the tunnels made them both freeze. Colonel Morrison's voice carried through the darkness, barking orders to his extraction team. They'd found the entrance. "How much time do we need?" Sarah whispered, checking her weapon. "Hours, maybe days to fully decode this." Reeves's hands shook as he photographed the tablets with desperate efficiency. "But Sarah, if I'm reading this correctly, the Keepers weren't just guardians of knowledge. They were preventing something from awakening." The footsteps grew closer. Sarah counted at least 6 sets of boots, military precision in their approach. Morrison had brought enough firepower to level this place if necessary, and she had no doubt he would use it to bury the truth forever. Kyle emerged from a side passage, his pale features grim. "The defense systems are responding to the surface dwellers' presence. The city is beginning to seal itself." As if summoned by his words, a low grinding sound reverberated through the stone. Dust rained from the ceiling as ancient mechanisms stirred to life. Somewhere in the distance, massive barriers were sliding into place, cutting off escape routes with the methodical patience of a civilization that had perfected the art of hiding. "The spiral chamber," Kyle continued, urgency creeping into his normally calm voice. "Elder Naya says the primary archive is there. Everything your people need to know about what's coming." Sarah grabbed Reeves's arm. "We move, now." They followed Kyle through a maze of corridors that seemed to shift and change as they ran. The walls themselves appeared to be alive, responding to their presence with ripples of light that guided their path while simultaneously obscuring it from potential pursuers. Sarah had seen advanced technology before, but this felt like something beyond science, a fusion of engineering and biology that challenged everything she thought she knew about the possible. The grinding sounds intensified. Behind them, she could hear Morrison's team encountering the city's defenses, shouts of confusion as passages sealed themselves, curses as their electronic equipment failed in the presence of the Keeper's ancient technology. "Contact! We have movement in the tunnels!" Morrison's voice echoed off the stone, distorted but unmistakably furious. Sarah risked a glance back and saw muzzle flashes illuminating the corridor they'd just left. The soldiers were firing at something, but their bullets seemed to dissolve harmlessly against the living walls. The spiral chamber opened before them like the inside of a nautilus shell, its curved walls lined with thousands of crystalline data nodes, each one pulsed with stored information, the accumulated knowledge of a civilization that had watched humanity's ancestors take their first steps toward consciousness. Elder Naya waited in the center, her ancient hands pressed against a control surface that flowed like liquid mercury. "The awakening has begun," she said without preamble. "Your military's electromagnetic pulses have disrupted containment fields that have held for 12,000 years. "Containment fields for what?" Sarah demanded. "The Devourers." Naya's voice carried the weight of eons. "Your myths call them by many names, the things that drove the first civilizations underground, the reason the Keepers chose isolation over dominion." The chamber shuddered as something massive moved far below them. Through the translucent floor, Sarah glimpsed shapes that defied description, geometric forms that hurt to look at directly, writhing with a hunger that transcended physical need. "The electromagnetic signatures from your surface weapons," Naya continued, "they resonate with the Devourer's neural patterns. Each pulse weakens the barriers we've maintained since the last ice age." Reeves stared at his camera's display screen, his face ashen. The countdown on the tablets. It's not measuring time, it's measuring containment field degradation. An explosion rocked the chamber as Morrison's team breached the outer defenses. Emergency lighting bathed everything in crimson as the city's protective systems reached critical failure. "There's a way," Naya said, her form already beginning to fade as she channeled her life force into the failing controls. "But it requires a choice your species has never made before. Absolute truth or comfortable ignorance." Sarah felt the weight of impossible decisions crushing down on her. Behind them, Morrison's soldiers advanced with orders to silence everyone who'd seen too much. Below them, ancient horrors stirred toward wakefulness. and ahead lay a choice that would determine whether humanity's next chapter would be written in knowledge or blood. The crystalline walls began to crack. The elevator descended through darkness so complete that Sarah felt as though she were falling through space itself. The ancient mechanism groaned and shuddered around them, each metallic protest echoing through the shaft like a death rattle. Beside her, Marcus gripped the rail with white knuckles, while Dr. Chen muttered calculations under her breath, trying to estimate their depth. "We've been descending for 12 minutes, Chen whispered. "At this rate, we're at least 3,000 feet below the surface." Sarah's stomach lurched, not from the motion but from the implications. The Keepers hadn't just built an underground city, they'd constructed something that defied everything humanity thought it knew about ancient civilizations. The technology required for this elevator alone shouldn't have existed thousands of years ago. The shaft finally opened into a vast cavern illuminated by the same ethereal blue light they'd seen above. But this wasn't another level of the city they'd already discovered. This was something else entirely. The elevator platform settled onto solid ground with a resonant clang that seemed to wake something in the darkness. As their eyes adjusted, Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. Before them stretched what could only be described as a harbor, complete with stone docks extending into an underground sea that disappeared into blackness beyond their vision. But it was what rested at those docks that made her blood run cold. Ships. Dozens of them, their sleek hulls reflecting the blue light like polished obsidian. They were clearly ancient, yet their design was unlike anything from any historical period Sarah knew. The vessels appeared to be carved from single pieces of black stone, with flowing lines that seemed more grown than built. Strange symbols covered their hulls, symbols that seemed to shift and writhe when she wasn't looking directly at them. "My God," Marcus breathed. They were explorers. Dr. Chen approached the nearest vessel, her scientific curiosity overriding caution. "The craftsmanship is extraordinary. The stone appears to be volcanic glass, but I've never seen anything work to this precision. The structural integrity alone should be impossible." Sarah moved toward the water's edge, peering into the dark liquid. It wasn't water at all, she realized. The substance was too thick, too dark, and it seemed to pulse with its own internal light. As she watched, something moved beneath the surface, something large enough to create ripples that lapped against the stone docks. "We need to document this and get back to the surface," she said, though even as the words left her mouth, she knew it was too late for that. They'd crossed a line the moment they'd entered the tree. Every step deeper into this place took them further from any possibility of returning to their normal lives. A sound echoed across the harbor, the scrape of stone against stone. The three of them froze as one of the ship's boarding ramps began to lower, its ancient mechanisms moving with impossible smoothness. No rust, no deterioration, as if the vessel had been waiting here not for millennia, but for mere moments. "That's not possible," Chen whispered. "There's no power source, no—" Her words were cut short as figures began to emerge from the ship's interior. At first, Sarah thought they were more keepers, but as they moved into the light, she saw the differences. These beings were taller, their robes a deep blue-black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their faces, when visible beneath their hoods, bore the same elongated features as the other keepers, but their eyes held an intelligence that felt alien, ancient beyond measure. The lead figure raised one hand, and Sarah felt a pressure in her mind, a presence that wasn't entirely unpleasant, but was undeniably foreign. Images flashed through her consciousness, not memories but knowledge. She saw the ships sailing through underground waterways that connected to the ocean itself, to other continents, other hidden harbors. She saw the keepers as they once were, not guardians of a single city, but masters of a global network that predated human civilization by tens of thousands of years. She saw the catastrophe that had ended their reign. Not war or disease, but something far worse. The very planet itself had turned against them, forcing them to retreat to these hidden places, to wait and watch as younger species took tentative steps toward the light. And she saw why they had brought her here, why they had chosen this moment to reveal themselves. The same forces that had once threatened the Keeper's civilization were stirring again. The underground nuclear tests, the deep drilling projects, the gradual warming of the planet. Humanity was repeating the same mistakes that had once brought down a civilization far more advanced than their own. The images faded, leaving Sarah gasping. The lead figure lowered his hand and spoke in that same melodic language they'd heard before, but now, somehow, she understood. "The time of watching is ending," he said. "The time of choosing has begun." Behind the first group of keepers, more were emerging from other ships, their number growing until the harbor filled with silent, watching figures. All of them focused on the three humans who had stumbled into the greatest secret in Earth's history. The elevator descended through layers of earth and time, each floor revealing glimpses of civilizations that predated recorded history. Sarah pressed her face to the reinforced glass, watching millennia of human development flash past in reverse. The keepers stood silent behind her, their ancient faces etched with the weight of guardianship that had passed through countless generations. "Your surface world believes it invented agriculture 12,000 years ago," Elder Thane said softly as they passed a vast underground chamber filled with terraced gardens. "We were perfecting crop rotation when your ancestors still lived in caves." The elevator shuddered to a halt at what the control panel indicated was level 47. Through the doors, Sarah could see a massive library stretching beyond the reach of light. Scrolls, tablets, and books filled towering shelves that disappeared into darkness above. The air hummed with preservation technology that kept humanity's true history intact. "Everything your people have discovered, we discovered first," Mira explained, leading Sarah down a corridor lined with astronomical instruments. Steam power, electricity, flight, medicine that could extend human life for centuries. "We developed it all in the safety of the deep places." Sarah's legs trembled as they walked. The implications crashed over her like waves. Why? Why hide all this? Think of the diseases we could cure, the problems we could solve. Elder Thane stopped before a massive vault door, its surface covered in symbols that seemed to shift and writhe in the artificial light. "Because we tried that once." His voice carried the weight of ancient regret. "We shared our knowledge with the surface dwellers. The result was catastrophic." The vault door opened with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a chamber that stole Sarah's breath. Weapons lined the walls, not primitive spears or swords, but devices that pulsed with contained energy. At the center stood a single artifact on a pedestal, a crystalline structure no larger than her fist that seemed to contain a miniature star. "Atlantis," Mira whispered. "Your myths remember it as a lost city, but it was our greatest attempt at surface integration. We shared our technology, our medicine, our knowledge of the Earth's deep places. For a generation, it worked." Sarah approached the crystal, feeling heat radiating from its core. "What happened?" "Power corrupts," Elder Thane said simply. "The surface rulers wanted to weaponize our knowledge. When we refused, they tried to take it by force. This," he gestured to the crystal, "was their attempt to replicate our energy source." The explosion sank an entire continent and nearly destroyed both civilizations. The truth hit Sarah like a physical blow. Every legend, every myth about lost civilizations, advanced ancient technology, gods who walked among humans, they were memories of the Keeper's previous attempts at contact, and each attempt had ended in disaster. "The Chinese government that captured you," Mira continued, "they've been close to finding us for decades. Satellite imaging, deep Earth scanning, following electromagnetic anomalies. When they detected the energy signature from your location, it confirmed their worst fears or their greatest hopes." Sarah's mind raced. The interrogation wasn't about military intelligence. They wanted to know what I'd seen, what I'd learned down here. "And now they're mobilizing," Elder Thane said grimly. "Our sensors detect massive excavation equipment moving toward this location. They believe they can succeed where previous surface civilizations failed." The implications terrified her. If the Chinese government, or any government, gained access to this technology, the balance of world power would shift catastrophically. The weapons in this vault alone could level cities. The energy sources could power nations or destroy them. "You have to move," Sarah said urgently. "Evacuate deeper. Find another location." Mira shook her head sadly. "We've been moving deeper for millennia, Sarah. There's nowhere left to go. The Earth's core grows unstable from our presence. Our energy signatures are becoming impossible to hide. This is why the Council debates whether to reveal ourselves or—" She trailed off. "Or what?" Elder Thane's expression grew grave. "Or ensure the surface world never finds us. We have the capability to trigger seismic events, to reshape the Earth's surface. We could eliminate the threat permanently." The casual way he spoke of potential genocide chilled Sarah's blood. These beings, for all their wisdom and advancement, viewed surface humanity as children playing with matches in a gunpowder factory. "There has to be another way," she insisted. "Not all surface governments are the same. The international community could—" "Could what?" Mira interrupted. "Unite in peace? Share resources equally? Your species has had thousands of years to prove it can handle power responsibly. Instead, you've weaponized every discovery, turned every innovation into a tool of conquest." The elevator began moving again, carrying them back toward the surface levels. Sarah realized with growing horror that she wasn't just a witness to this underground civilization. She was about to become its judge. The Keepers weren't just showing her their world, they were asking her to help decide the fate of both civilizations. Above them, the sound of heavy machinery grew louder. The ancient chamber trembled as Sarah's hand hovered over the crystalline control matrix. Every surface around her pulsed with ethereal light, responding to her proximity like a living thing awakening from millennia of slumber. The Keepers stood in a protective circle, their luminescent forms casting dancing shadows on walls covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. "The surface dwellers have found us," Elder Thys spoke, her voice carrying the weight of ages. "Our sensors detect military vehicles approaching the tree line. Your people seek you, Sarah Chen, but they bring destruction in their wake." Through the chamber's viewing portal, Sarah could see the tactical team surrounding the massive oak that had been her sanctuary. Colonel Morrison's voice crackled through intercepted radio transmissions, ordering his men to establish a perimeter. They had no idea what they were about to unleash. "The seal must be restored," Sarah said, her training as a combat medic warring with the magnitude of what she'd discovered. These beings had preserved knowledge that predated human civilization, technologies that could revolutionize medicine, energy, everything. But they could also be weaponized in ways that would make nuclear weapons seem primitive. Keth moved beside her, his ethereal form more solid now in this sacred space. "Your choice will echo through centuries, surface dweller. Reveal us, and both our peoples may perish in the chaos that follows. Protect the secret, and you carry the burden alone." The ground above shook with approaching footsteps. Sarah knew Morrison's persistence. He would tear apart every inch of forest until he found her. The rescue mission she'd prayed for during months of captivity had become humanity's greatest threat. "There is another way," Elder Thys whispered, her ancient eyes meeting Sarah's. "The memory stone can transfer our knowledge to you alone. You would become the bridge between worlds, carrying our secrets until humanity proves ready." Sarah felt the weight of decision crushing down on her. Through the portal, she watched soldiers setting up drilling equipment. They detected the anomalous readings, the energy signatures that had drawn them deeper into the forest. Soon they would breach the outer chambers. "How long do we have?" she asked. "Minutes, perhaps less," Keth replied, his form flickering with urgency. "The protective barriers weaken with each passing moment. Your military's electromagnetic pulses have disrupted our concealment systems." The memory stone pulsed on its pedestal, a crystalline repository of 10,000 years of accumulated knowledge. Sarah understood now why the Keepers had remained hidden. Humanity still waged wars over oil and territory. What would they do with technology that could reshape matter itself? Sarah, Morrison's voice echoed from above, distorted by the chamber's acoustics. We know you're down there. This is a rescue operation. She almost laughed at the irony. They thought they were saving her, but she was trying to save them all. The transfer will change you, Elder Thys warned. Your mind will expand to accommodate our knowledge, but you will no longer be entirely human. The burden of two civilizations will be yours to bear. Sarah looked at her hands, still bearing scars from her imprisonment, from the torture that had driven her to seek refuge in what she'd thought was just a tree. Those same hands could now hold the key to humanity's future or its destruction. The drilling sounds grew louder, more insistent. Metal scraped against ancient stone as Morrison's team carved their way downward. I accept, Sarah said, placing her palm on the memory stone. Light exploded through her consciousness, 10 millennia of history, science and wisdom flooding her neural pathways. She saw the rise and fall of surface civilizations, witnessed the Keeper's decision to retreat underground as humanity grew increasingly violent. The knowledge burned through her like liquid fire, formulas for clean energy, cures for diseases, technologies that could heal a dying planet. But also weapons, terrible weapons that could unmake the bonds between atoms themselves. As the transfer completed, the chamber began its programmed shutdown. Walls sealed themselves with molecular precision, leaving only the natural cave system that Morrison's team would eventually discover. The Keepers faded like morning mist, retreating deeper into the earth through passages that would close behind them. Sarah found herself alone in a simple cave, holding nothing but fragments of quartz that looked entirely ordinary. The memory stone had crumbled to dust, its purpose fulfilled, but her mind blazed with impossible knowledge, carefully compartmentalized to preserve her sanity. Sarah, there! Morrison's voice grew closer. She looked up as his flashlight beam found her, forcing tears of relief that weren't entirely fabricated. Let him think she was just another rescued prisoner of war. Let the world continue its normal course while she decided how much truth it could handle. The greatest secret in human history was now hers alone to keep, or to reveal.